Hello, everybody. Oh, you went on me. Okay. Thank you all for joining us. We're just letting everyone to just join us and trickle in, and then we can get started. We're super happy to have Jamea with us today. Can't wait to talk to her. Thank you all for joining us. So maybe give us like a minute or two, and then we get started. In the interim, if you want to think of a question to ask Jamea, I encourage you to think of it. Feel free to type it in the message box, and then we'll give some time at the end to ask the questions. Thank you all for joining. We'll give it a few seconds.
And you can hear me well?
I can hear you well.
Okay, good.
Can everybody hear us well? Give us a thumbs up if you can. Perfect. Perfect. Actually, Jamea, should we just get started? I think as people kind of...
Let's go with it,
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Jamea. I'm so happy to have you as our guest artist. You have been, I'm a huge fan of your works. Ever since the Joan Mitchell Foundation, actually, they introduced your work to me, and I've been just in love with your work, and I'm so happy to have you today. So for those people that don't know your work or are not familiar with you, maybe give them a little bit of a background about yourself, about your work, and then we'll dive right in.
Okay, absolutely. So my name is Jamea Richomnd, and I'm a mixed media portrait artist. I'm from Detroit, Michigan, born and raised, and I attended Jackson State University in Mississippi, which is a historically Black college for undergrad. I attended Howard University for graduate school. It's where I received my MFA. And so all those things, so growing up in Detroit, going to a historically Black college and marching in a band, and going through Howard really essentially just shapes who I am as an artist, as a woman. But as we, progress throughout our conversation, I'll touch on those different modalities.
Sounds good. Actually, tell us, how did you get into art? Like, what was it about art that attracted you?
So I was one of those people who started doing art at age 3, right? I knew that I wanted to be an artist, and I can remember my sister is 13 years older than me. My brother was 6 years older than me. And when I was about 5 years old, they would bring their school textbooks home, right? And my mother would get me line notebooks, like line paper.
To
work with, but I would tear out the blank pages in their textbooks to do art on, and I will put Vaseline on the back of the papers and place them on the wall.
Oh my God, I love that.
So at that very young age, I didn't understand what I was doing. I don't even think I went to a art exhibition, but I knew that I wanted people in my home to see it. But my first introduction to what I would say aesthetics and art growing up in Detroit was through hair. So Detroit was known as the hair capital. And during the 90s, I was born in the 80s, but growing up in the 90s, we had like the sculptural ponytails, the gelled baby hair. I recognized then that, there was something really artistic about it. Another thing that that was my first introduction to art was fashion. And so my mother did social dancing, and in Detroit they call it bopping. Chicago, they call it Chicago stepping. In DC, they call it hand dancing. And so it's this social dancing where, the partners would kind of coordinate their outfits. And so I grew up seeing my mother. She will have a red wig with the red dress that matched their red Cadillac, her and her husband. So I saw these things, and Detroit we're Motor City, so people customize their cars. So before I even stepped foot in a museum, which is about maybe 8 or 9 years old, I already kind of understood or viewed the people within my communities as like um, walking, living artworks in themselves, a way of expression. And I know that I thought that way because when I would draw, I probably had like hundreds of notebooks from, you know, childhood all the way very young to high school from graduating. I remember really enjoying drawing the sculptural ponytails and the outfits, the clothing. So those are the things that really had a major impact on me. And by the time I was in high school, even before high school, my mother and my grandfather recognized that I was really into art, so they put me in special art programs. Um, I by time I was age 16, I was in a car design class um, because I grew up on 7 Mile in Detroit. And my neighbor, my mom will always take my drawings to everyone in the community, like, look what my baby did. And Miss Gurney had a daughter whose name is Marietta, and she designed the Beretta car. I forget which auto make of that it was, maybe a Chrysler, but she was the first Black female car designer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so I remember I was probably maybe 15 in her living room, and my mom she showed her my drawings, and she said, I want to connect you with my mentor. So I started taking car design classes at Wayne State University in Detroit, but I didn't like car design. But that was really important because it was a weekend class, and Wayne State University had an exhibition, and it was a group exhibition. And I remember walking inside, you know, the gallery at the university, and I saw a Renee Cox piece, and the piece was called "The Liberation of Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben," and that was my first time ever seeing what I would call art made by a Black American. I grew up, I took art in school, but we would only learn about, you know, our Western artists. We would recreate Van Gogh paintings and so forth. And I was so amazed at this painting, and I was just staring. And I didn't know at the time that, you know, Renee Cox uses her body, you know, in her paintings. I didn't know it was her at the time. And I remember asking my teacher, like, is this is a Black artist? You know, I was just amazed. But that was a moment that really gave me, I would call, permission to be a visual artist, because I'm in high school, I would go to the DIA, which is the Detroit Institute of Arts. They have an amazing Renaissance collection, but I haven't quite seen at that moment. So that was a very, I felt really empowered by that. But at that time, I thought I wanted to be a fashion designer, although I would draw, but I hated to sew. And at the time, you know, in order to be a fashion designer, you had to sew. And we know that's not necessarily the case now. So yeah, so my whole life it was a constant. And I essentially had a family and a community that supported that interest.
That's amazing. So it's very interesting because your work is very powerful. And when you look at the women that are represented in your work, they're all very stylish, fashionable, powerful women. And so it's so interesting to hear where your inspiration comes from. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I read somewhere that it was lack of representation of these women in the glossy magazines, you know, with high-end luxury goods that really made you determined to focus on these women and portray them in a really powerful way in your work. Is that correct?
Well, I would just say that since I've created art, and I'm sorry for the noise, I'm in an Airbnb and they're just hammering. I don't know what's going on. But I would say since I've started creating art, my artwork has always been about women who look like me. Period. And my work is autobiographical, but one of the things about Detroit is we were known for being very stylistic, very fashionable, because as Black Americans began to migrate up north, you know, this was our first opportunity at having middle class status. And so naturally, once you have access to this money, you want to look really nice. I mean, let me make this clear. We've always been very fashionable people, period. Okay. um, but in growing up in the city of Detroit, like I was wearing Gucci, Chanel, I would wear my mother mink coats. It was very, very over the top. And so, for instance, one of my paintings, I had an exhibition. This was 2 years ago. It was called Fly Girl Fly. And I dealt with boosting culture. And for those of you who aren't familiar with boosters, I mean, it's not a Black thing. Everybody, have access to a booster. It was on Sex in the City. It's when you purchase something that's like a knockoff version of a Gucci bag, or the other version is a person who steals these things and they resell it, right? And so I remember my senior year of high school, my senior pictures, I have a bootleg Versace outfit on, but I feel really, compelled to tell these stories because when I go into museum spaces or gallery spaces, I need to make sure that I see myself, my story.
Yeah.
So I feel really compelled to make the work. And oftentimes when we speak in terms of respectability, there's this idea that like poor people shouldn't have access to luxury. You know what I mean? Like that's a whole other conversation. But I growing up, I've always saw the people within my communities walk as royalty. I mean, from gold chains, from certain shoes. And so, that's something that was really instilled in me, like, hey, make sure when you out in the world that you look good and you are representing your family well. So those are the things that I kind of carried into my practice.
That's brilliant. I really love that. So, Jamea, talk to us about your process in terms of the works that you create. And I know that you had an impromptu trip to New York, so you're not in your studio today, but I know you have some work that you will share your screen with us and you will show your work. I know you're a mixed media artist, but talk to us about your process and how you go about creating your pieces and your work. And I'd love to hear about that.
Should I share my screen?
Yeah, maybe share a screen so that's probably.
Let's see how this works, y'all. Okay, can you guys see that?
Yeah, we can see it now.
Okay, let me see if I can move y'all. Okay, I can move y'all out the way. I just wanted to see if I can, okay, yeah. So this is one of my my newest paintings. I completed it about 2 weeks ago. I just want to look up the title of it because it's kind of long, and and this is called Water Ritual Conjuring a Horned Serpent. They realized they had access. So what you're looking at is I'm a mixed media artist, but I'm a collage artist. So everything that you see is additive. Even the figures, I draw them, I color them, I paint on top of them, and I cut them out and I superimpose them onto the canvas. So you see this arrow. So all throughout the background are small pieces of paper that I'm beginning to piece together. I approach each painting. I don't have a sketch. I have a blank canvas, and I essentially allow my pieces to tell me what needs to happen. And this is the first piece I created post coming back from my Joe Mitchell residency that was cut short.
Yeah.
And so I was really devastated by this, but this Joe Mitchell residency, 2020 is the first year I created colored girls. It's funny to say that. I usually create grayscale figures, but now I made a transition. And this process, so by the time I left New Orleans, we're heavy into the pandemic, right? I'm from Detroit. I'm seeing a lot of my peers' parents are dying. I'm like really stressed. So I went through what I would call some sort of spiritual transformation through this. And this is the first painting that I would say that my practice, my art practice and my spirituality kind of combined. And so I went on this fast. I didn't want to eat anything. I'm reading all this literature, I'm meditating. And so this is the piece that comes out. And I look at it, and I was talking to my art dealer, Mark, and I'm just like, I feel like I downloaded this information from the ether somewhere.
Wow.
And so let me see if I can give you guys some close-ups of it. So I'm looking at this as this is this water ritual that I'm still, my screen did a weird thing. Is it okay?
Yeah, you're fine. You're fine.
Oh, okay. It was kind of vibrating for me. So yeah, so I'm creating this piece, and I'm creating it. I'm kind of like, I'm out of breath. I'm crying. I mean, this is really new for me. I'm like, what is going on? And so yeah, I'm just piecing it together. I look at my paintings as a jigsaw puzzle. And then I'm gonna, well, hold on, let me go back because I want to finish talking about this painting. So I view it as a jigsaw puzzle because, let's say this piece right here, this black and white piece right here, I need to make sure that it's balanced with what's going on up here. So I have thousands of really small pieces of paper that I'm creating a narrative with. So my process is very exhilarating. Painting to me is not relaxing. It's very like it's like running a sprint for me, because I don't know where I'm going. I'm trusting the spirit, or whatever you want to call it, that's working through me. So it's a very organic process. And I'm just going to comb through some of the newer studio. You can't see it. This is glitter, so she has a gold tooth.
Oh wow! Oh my God, I see.
Yeah, you can't really tell. Now the previous painting was 6 feet by 6 feet. Wait. Excuse me. This painting is 6 feet by 4 feet. So I typically work large scale. I call them monumental paintings. I feel really empowered to have the space to make these figures larger than life. It's really a privilege to be able to create in that space. This painting is called Awakening, and I feel that this piece is really allegorical to this this transformation that I had going, when the pandemic hit. So notice, like, all of, if there are feet in any of my paintings, they all have alligator shoes.
Oh, I didn't notice that. I love that.
They all have alligator shoes, and I have to quote the great philosopher Biggie Smalls, also known as Christopher Wallace, and he has a statement in his song, "Stink Pink Gators, my Detroit players." And part of that is because literally that if you were a person of status in Detroit, you have your gator shoes, and the bigger the blocks on the gators, the bigger the status. So I'm thinking I'm incorporating that history, those components of my culture into the paintings. The figures are always wearing really loud, flamboyant clothes. And I love to tell the story because my two people I went to college, they're in it on this chat. And my first year of college, I was in marching band. And I came to band practice like my first or second day. Now, mind you, this is in Mississippi. And I had on a Coogee sweatsuit.
Yeah.
Now, Coogee sweaters is the sweaters that they were really popularized in 90s by hip hop. Bill Cosby, also known to wear these sweaters as well. But these sweaters are about $400, $500. They're Australian sweaters. And I thought I was so fresh. I may have had like some ostrich sneakers on, going to band practice. And somebody said to me, take that ugly shit off. I'm just like, know how much this costs. So I tell that story to say that, you know, part of that was that aesthetic was a very Detroit Midwestern aesthetic, right? It's very flamboyant. It's a lot going on. And so as I'm in you know, DC now, and you know, you go on Capitol Hill, it's very gray, it's very muted.
Right.
But when you go to Harlem and certain parts of any urban city, you see the color, you see the Kool-Aid hair, right? So I want to make sure that the people who look like me, who come from where I come from, they see themselves in these very powerful stances.
It's so important. I love that. I love that.
This is a piece that I don't have a title for. I literally finished it before I came to New York. And this is 6 feet by 8 feet.
Wow.
These women are playing a game called Bid Whiz. They could be, I don't know if it's Bid Whiz or Spades. And that's a game that is known in the Black American community. And what I look at them as, you know, we can look at this as recreational, but they're strategizing. And my figures are always looking at the viewer because they know that the viewer is watching them. Right. So they're very calculated.
Wow.
They're very conscious of it. And that's also part of the reason why they don't smile. And so when I look at the earliest photography, so I'm a Black American because I fit within a construct, but I'm also Indigenous American. So my family is Mississippi, Choctaw, and Creek. So when you look at, you know, the earliest depictions of Indigenous Americans, Black Americans, we are not smiling. And it's a reason why that is, you know. And so that's a continuum, you know. I'm thinking about history. I'm placing myself within the framework of American art.
So important and educational. Thank you. Wow.
Yep.
Incredible work.
Thank you. Thank you. Now notice their shoes.
Yeah,
right?
I was just gonna highlight that.
They're wearing alligator shoes, and her boots right here, they are not pink, they are stink pink. Okay, it's the difference. And I'm gonna just move this back so we can look at the picture in its totality. I felt like this piece took a while to create because I didn't understand the hands that they were playing. I knew that they were playing a game, but I knew this was bigger than a game. I look at this as strategy. And as we look at the state of America, essentially the world, we see that there's a paradigm shift that's happening. And there are conversations that we are having amongst ourselves about what is this next stage? What does this next phase look like? And I believe that they're discussing it.
I love that, Jamea. This is incredible. I'm like literally lost for words. I'm just like, I just want to stare at your work and just like learn more and more as you're talking.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really, thank you. Did you have more work to show, or did you want to?
Technically, you know what? Do you guys want to see more work?
I do want to see more work.
Okay, so let's see. Let's go here. Okay, how do I move out of this? Okay. All right, so I did a presentation at NYU on Friday, and it was still up. And I'm like, you know what, let me leave this up just in case. Yeah. So I'm gonna scroll back. Okay. Oh, okay, cool. So, but I do want to start here because as my work begins to get contextualized, I would like people to view it through a certain lens.
Mm-hmm.
And so with this, I started with these news clippings, and this is about the racial cleansing that drove out 1,100 Black residents in Forsyth County. And this was in 1911, 1912. My great grandfather was a young man who was attacked. He ended up murdering a white man in a response, and he left his family. And while his family stayed in Georgia, he went to Alabama. And so from there, because a lot of times trauma is in our DNA, right? We inherited a lot of trauma.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I also want to talk about the Racial Integrity Act of 1924 in Virginia. So my namesake is Richomnd, my maiden name. And my family is from Virginia. But in 1924, Walter Plecker, the governor of Virginia, reclassified the indigenous people as colored, who was essentially reclassified as Negro. So there was this erasure happening. Mm-hmm. So I say that to say that when we are talking about, art in relationship to race and sexuality and all of the isms that exist, there are many pieces that are left out that I find problematic.
Interesting.
I was born in 1982, and the 80s was the era of, and this is the Coogee sweater, by the way.
Yeah.
The 80s is the crack epidemic happened in the 80s, and the AIDS epidemic happened. And, we don't talk about the crack epidemic. And one of my favorite sayings is crack is as American as baseball and apple pie. And the crack epidemic is also something that was strategically created and planted within every Black urban community simultaneously. Mm-hmm. So I am the child of the children. I'm the child because our parents and people in our community was affected by this epidemic. Right. And Dave Chappelle has this interesting saying where he talks about leaving DC, and he left. He came back in like mid 80s, and he said, it like in my community, a crack explosion happened. So when we talk about, and this is 2020, right? And we are in these very peculiar, crazy times, but through the Black American lens, this has been going on in our community since, 1492, since really the 1500s when DeSoto landed here in Americas. So this was part of like the things that inspired me. I'll just play a really quick so right there, that's like a quick snippet. I marched in this band, and these are the women who danced in front of us. These are the dance girls. We call them J-sets. And I'm going to go to some paintings that kind of corresponds with all of this. This is a portrait from the Library of Congress, and this is of a Choctaw man. When we talk about the construct of Blackness, we don't speak in terms of the breadth of who is a part of that conversation. And of course, that includes our, Africans who were stolen and brought here, some migrated, but it also includes Caribbean, our Caribbean brothers and sisters, and the overwhelming that's left out are Indigenous Americans. Right. So when you look at Black American culture, you see components of all of that. And of course, European influence as well. And I'll kind of touch on that. And I'm going to show this very quick because. Oh, yeah. So this is Chicago stepping, and they're in Detroit. So this one, I said my mother was social dancing. This is an example, and I found this so powerful because one, these are two men dancing, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things I want the people who are viewing this to notice is how everyone is coordinated.
Right.
You have all white parties, all red parties, all black parties. So there's this sense of coordination amongst the community, amongst the people who came to the events to share this joy.
Right.
So I just wanted to give a snippet of that because a lot of times people don't really have a frame of reference for that.
Right. Yeah.
And I have an example of a young woman's hair. This is from like the hair wars that happens in Detroit. So this is what the sculptural hair and colors, this is what I grew up looking at. All right, let's see. Yeah, and I'll just come through it, and if you have any more questions, is my screen, you guys see the whole screen?
Yeah, I think so. I think everybody probably sees this whole screen.
Okay, cool, because so these are 7 Mile Girls, and you can see the Coogee sweater. You can see the sort of sculptural components of the hair when you look through the work.
Love that.
This piece, girl with green alligator bag next to a mannequin, and this piece was I really enjoyed this piece because she's standing alongside a headless white mannequin. And oftentimes when scholars or people, attempt to contextualize Black American aesthetics and art, they always start from an oppressive, like, oh, because white people. And I would just say, growing up in Detroit, it was an all Black community.
Right.
We were laying our baby hair and dressing. We were not thinking about white America.
Right. Right.
So I have to say that because as people contextualize my work, they want to pull that, it's there. This is the bag lady, the booster.
Yeah.
Instead of putting the Gucci labels up on it or whatever you want to call it, I put my initials on it, JRE.
Love it. I love that.
And I'll stop. And if you guys have any questions.
Yeah, we do. Maybe I'll ask you one of the first questions that we received. And that was, how did Jamea's time at the best HBCU, Jackson State University, impact her work?
It did. It really did a lot. Because right now I'm thinking about, okay, so once I left Jackson and I went to Howard University, I started an artist collective. And my artist collective, along with another artist named Amber Robles Gordon, it was called Delusions of Grandeur. Mm-hmm. And we kind of fashioned it from Afrocobra, which is a Black arts collective that was formed in the 60s during the Black arts movement. But I would say I marched in the band when I was in Mississippi. And what it essentially taught me was the power of stepping together and having that collective.
Right.
We call it catching the flash. And so as I'm beginning, like in 2020, I'm having conversations with artists and we're saying like, hey, what does this next phase of the world look like for us? I always go back to like my training in Jackson to say, hey, we have to move and march as one. I want to show a piece with so right here, this is called Fringe Pants and Alligator Shoes. So I showed you guys the dance girls, the sets with the fringe, and it took me a while because I'm obsessed with fringe on legs. Right. And it's like maybe a year ago, I looked at a band video and I'm like, oh, that's where I got it from. And when you look at, Indigenous American attire and clothing, fringe is always there.
Right.
Okay? So there's some really interesting connections as I connect the dots in my practice. And I'll just go back a little bit and keep going.
That's incredible. The comment we got was, we get so much confidence seeing ourselves, looking back at ourselves in visual art. I see all the various parts of myself in your work. my super feminine, my spiritual self, my hood self, my professional self, my wife self, sister, mother, aunt, friend, and lover of nature self. That's incredible. That's an incredible comment.
That's really important because again, when I go into these spaces, I do live in Washington, D.C., and we are afforded free museum access. And when I go into, the American Art Smithsonian, I love portraiture. I mean, when I look at, classical era and Renaissance era portraits, like I can't breathe. It's so stunning.
Yeah.
But the question is, what does that look like for Black Americans? And I took that. I feel really empowered to create and to have conversations, even if they're uncomfortable, to make sure, like, hey, I want to make sure that my niece, my sons, and really everybody, like, I think the world right now is ready for representation. Like,
Absolutely.
So yeah, I feel really empowered by it.
That's incredible. And I think that's what you're doing with your pieces. It's just bringing that wealth of representation that everybody can relate to it and everybody can really learn from it. It's been super educational speaking with you, truly.
Thank you.
So, Jamea, I also wanted to ask you, how did you, within the art world, how did you grow your career as an artist? Because I'm sure a lot of people on the call would want to know that as well. I know we have a group of artists attending this call as well. So let us know give us a background on how that happened for you and how did you start growing your career as an artist?
Absolutely. It's two answers to that question. It wasn't necessarily, I won't say it wasn't college. Like, college did it, right? Once I graduated from undergrad and I went, my husband is from Milwaukee. We moved to Milwaukee for 3 years. I joined an organization called ABEA, which was stood for like African American Artists to Beginning to Educate America About Art. It's a long acronym, but this artist group, and they met weekly or maybe bi-weekly once a month. And this was artists from a range of experiences, right? And some artists did, the art fair circuit, some were the gallery circuit, but it was essentially like a mentorship program. And so what I realized is, once you're older or more experienced artists recognize a younger person who's really eager to learn, they felt they were very very welcoming with information. And I was surprised by that. So when I came to Washington, D.C., I joined another art group called Black Artists of DAC, Black Artists of DC, BADC. And it was the same thing. I mean, Sam Gilliam was part of this organization, right? It wasn't just artists. There were curators, cultural workers within these groups. And then you also had, like, while you had the Black Artists of DC group, you had your women in the arts groups. You had all these different collectives. And it wasn't necessarily collectives. It was like critique groups. Every type of group. And that is where I got started, because I entered into this sort of network of thinkers, like-minded people, and I started, expanding my tribe, right? I met the collectors, and so one of the most important things is like attaching yourself, even if you don't know of one. Maybe you could create one with the local artists in your particular community. So that's what it was. And I was so hungry. I remember I listed every museum that I was interested in, and I emailed every single curator. This had to be like 2005 or 2006.
Wow.
My work was just like, not everyone responded, but some did. And I remember Franklin Sermons was one of them, who's at PAM right now, Perez Art Museum. And I'm like, hi, I just want you to see my work. I want to just introduce myself. And he responded, and he was like, oh my, thanks for reaching out. And we met for the first time like 2 years ago. He's like, Jamea.
Finally.
So I'm a very aggressive person. Like if I want something, I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna introduce myself. And also one of the most important things was showing up for my peers. Like I have to go, even if I don't feel like it, if my dear friend is having an art opening, 35, 40 minutes away, I have to show up because I will want them to show up for me.
Right.
So those are like the three things that kind of push me to where I want to be, and once you're amongst other artists, kind of pick up ideas and tips and tricks.
Right. That's very, very great feedback in terms of, because I think you're right. One, reaching out to get what you want and not shying away from it. I think that's key.
Yes.
And it's very important. And we often, some of the artists that I work with and that are part of our community, I notice that they're very much worried, or they kind of shy away. And I think number one, don't be scared. Just reach out. What's the worst thing is going to happen? You're either not going to hear from them, or they're going to say no. And
Or
it's
they're
not the end.
no.
Yeah, it's not the end of the world at all. So that's great. Thank you for that. The other thing I was going to ask you was with regards to because you've accomplished a lot in your career. Well, looking at it, I think you do. You do it, and you continue. What would you say maybe was one of those like biggest moments for you and how did you come about achieving it really?
It's about three of them. I'll touch on them briefly. So the first one was my first exhibition in Washington D.C. It's this exhibition called Artomatic, and it's when I guess you call it a collective organization. They gut out a building, right? A building that's typically in development that's still empty, and all artists come first serve. You get a wall, right?
Okay.
There's hundreds. It's like art fair, similar to like a Basel, but it's overload in one building, right? And I remember putting up my work there, and I was just so proud, like, oh man, this is my first DC exhibition, and it was hundreds of artists. And right when I put it up, like a week later, some blogger wrote the top 10 artists at Artomatic, and I was one of them.
Amazing.
And I'm like, what? Somebody noticed me? And that is when I understood the significance of like your art writers,
right,
and your curators and your critics. Like, okay, this is new. The second thing is when the Huffington Post about 5 years ago, they put top 30 artists under 30. It was actually maybe top 30 artists under 40. I'm like 30 then, and I was featured amongst them. And again, these writers, these curators, and understanding this bridge against everyone that makes this industry work. And one of the most empowering things that ever happened for me was being on Empire. And so
I was going to ask you about that actually.
I start off with this painting because when I was in graduate school, I created this in 2011, maybe 2011. And we had a critique, and I'm not going to name the person who owns my work now. He was a museum worker, and he came and was a guest critic, and he was just like, this is awful. It is horrible. This is not it, and that was also one of the best things that happened to me, because let me see, I've been lucky, and some people, I know artists and just people in general who had it rough. Like you just can't get this. Can't. I had a really good way, like a good ride, until this.
Yeah.
And it's like, it is all over the place. It is just awful. You need to go back to the drawing board. And I didn't appreciate it at the time, but it also illustrated to me how much I believed in this work, because I dismissed it. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to redo this because I understand what this work is about. He don't quite understand. He's probably looking at it through a very, purely aesthetics, but
Right.
I understood that this was bigger than the aesthetics. And from this, my practice evolved. But if I would have taken his advice, I would have like, okay, let me start over again. Let me kind of get rid of this.
Right.
And so this piece was chosen for Empire. Now, I'm not much of a TV watcher, as I have 3 sons, and I'm busy.
Yeah.
Um, but this work, it was on the first season, and it placed me within this space of Kerry James Marshall, Basquiat, Kehinde Wiley, who's like, not like me. I'm a part of this conversation.
Wow.
And so it introduced a lot of people to my work who's not familiar with the fine art world. And although I was dismissive of that, I'm like, these are the people who I care the most about about seeing my work.
Right.
So those were very major points in my career, and it took, and it's and what I'm essentially saying is more. It talks about people, but seeing something in you that you don't necessarily see in yourself.
Right. Absolutely.
Powerful.
Absolutely. That's incredible. Believe it or not, it's 2:47. I told you time flies during these sessions. So I have still a ton more questions, but just out of respect for your time and all the other attendees, I'm going to actually open it up if you can stay for a few more minutes. If there are any questions for you, feel free to either type it up or just unmute yourself, and you can ask Jamea directly yourself. Otherwise,
screen share. Should I stop the screen share?
If you want to.
Okay, I'll stop it.
All right. If there are any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Otherwise, I think we can end the meeting.
Okay. I'll say real quick, I'm Latoya from Birmingham, Alabama.
Hi, Latoya.
I just want to tell Jamea how proud I am of her success. I remember using one of her art work in college for my art appreciation class. I believe it's a women's hard work or women's work.
Women's work.
Yeah. And I got an A with that work, and I'm so appreciative of her allowing me to borrow her artwork, because as an artist, you know how they are about their and I am just so proud of her success, not just material things, but just knowing how hard she worked to get to where she is.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Toya, this is my best friend from college.
That's amazing.
But that also speaks on, like, part of the themes that I'm touching on with this talk was like people seeing something in you. Like, she wanted to use my work for her art appreciation class. They had to choose a professional artwork. And at this time, we're 19, and that's really powerful. And it speaks on the power of the viewer, the power of how art is so much outside of us. That's the other part of it. Mm-hmm. What it does for the community, what it does for, really essentially the world.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I feel really privileged to be able to practice my craft full time and to have the space to make the paintings that I make. So thank you for that, Toya.
That was incredible. I love that. We have one more question. How do you manage a career and your 3 boys?
Okay, so I have an amazing husband. So shout out to Jeffrey Edwards. I would not listen. I have a village. I have a village. My mother lives 10 minutes from me. My sister lives 10 minutes from me. And, it's one of those things where my husband we met when I was 19 years old. He knows. So I'm like, all right, baby, I got to go to New York. You signed up for this. So we have a really good system. One of the things, and I'm going to close on this, one of my mentors at Howard University, the great Michael Platt, he told me, he was like, never feel guilty for what you do, because your kids, look, they came on board of on the board of your ship. Mm-hmm. So if you got to take them on road, they go on the road. So don't ever, they'll thank you later.
Yeah.
And this is when I first entered into Howard, and I'm like, you know what? You're right. I have to make sure that I providing for them. I want to set an example, and the way that I do that is about like living out what's my birthright, just like they have theirs.
Absolutely.
So it's like determination. It is late hours, very little sleep, and having an amazing partner and community.
So important. So important. Do you know what? I'm gonna ask one last question, because I would love to know that. Who are your favorite artists?
Let me see. My favorite artist, who I look at her work and it brings me to tears, is Dina Lawson. Dina Lawson is a photographer. If you guys don't know her work, look it up. It's Deana Lawson, Lawson. And I love her work because her pieces have so much grace, and they look like her subjects they're me. Mm-hmm. They're my mother, they're my aunt, and we aren't really afforded the opportunity to see us within these spaces in our interiors. So she's one of my favorite artists. Alice Neal. I've always loved Alice Neal because she just has a grace with her work. Mm-hmm. Kerry James Marshall, I love him for his storytelling. He is a master storyteller, and that's something that it took me, I'm just now grasping what that means to be a storyteller with your practice. Mm-hmm. Jack Whitten. So if you guys ever have the opportunity to see my work in person, it's very textured. Mm-hmm. And looking at Jack Whitten, his pieces, this was 2 years ago. I can't remember to recall it, but he has a piece in the Baltimore Art Museum. It's monumental, and I was in tears. It was just like, oh my! It was the energy there. Bisa Butler, who's she's a Howard alum, and when I say this sister is innovative with the textiles, okay, and Joshua Claus, based in New York. He's a collage artist. Mm-hmm. And finally, Ebony G. Patterson. Yeah, she's like a mixed media textile. I can't look at her work because I'm so inspired by it. I don't want to mirror it, because people thought that, like at the beginning when I first started off, they thought they would tag me for her. They thought that.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
At the beginning. This is at the very beginning. And I'm like, oh, wow. So, I mean, she's just materiality, I love material and I love innovativeness. Mm-hmm. And, I'm looking at, when I think of collage, I look at Bromere Bearden as like the godfather of collage, and how my brain works is like, I'm the next iteration of that. I need to push it as far as I possibly can working in paper. Yeah. So I just love innovative, smart artists. Yeah.
That's amazing. Jamea, I don't know how to thank you, but truly this was such a great session. It was so educational. It was so good to learn about yourself, your art, the inspirations that you have. I really appreciate it. Thank you. I know we had, sorry, go ahead.
And I said, thank you for the invitation.
Oh, of course. I know we had some late arrivals, and few people might have had technical issues. We're dropping in and coming in. So we've recorded this session, and we will host it on our website, and you will get an email so that you can watch the recording of it. Thank you again. It was lovely having you.
And thank you, guys. Happy Juneteenth.
Happy Juneteenth. Thanks again. I'll end it now. Bye.